Hi, this is my lesson demo for critical issues in education. I decided I wanted to take this assignment and use something I learned from a professional development I attended recently. I am student teaching at Sanborn Elementary in Andover, and the English language arts curriculum they use is based off of Fountas and Pinnell. That curriculum really emphasizes using interactive read alouds, which is kind of difficult to do when you are online. So the professional development that I attended gave a strategy on how you can still have interactive read alouds with your class, even if you're virtually. And I think this could be really helpful if our fall semester is not totally at the school. So I have two friends with me who were nice enough to pretend to be my students for this demo. I can't film my actual students, so they are going to pretend to be the students for me. And we're going to listen to a read aloud together. And as we're listening, we're going to take pauses and have a little discussion about what's going on in the story so we can make it an interactive read aloud. So, before we start, I'm going to ask them if they could share with me in the chat box, or if they feel more comfortable speaking, they can speak about what they believe a fantasy story is. So, based in your own words, what do you think a fantasy story is? I see, let's see, a story that isn't real or a story that happens in a fake world. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and we're going to make up our own classroom definition for what is a fantasy story that we can refer to when we're listening to this story. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. And we're going to take a look at this chart. It's kind of big right now, so I can try to make it smaller. So we have what is a fantasy story, and we want to try to come up with our own classroom definition. So I saw a story that takes place in a fantasy world and a story that could not happen. So how do we think we could create our own student definition based on those two responses? Can I hear one of you or see one of you type an idea of how you would bring those together to make a definition for us, please?
You could say a story. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. You could say a story that isn't real and happens in a fake world.
I want to ask you guys though, have you ever heard a fantasy story that takes place in the real world? You don't have to answer, but think about it. Have you ever read like Percy Jackson that's in the real world? So I would say I think sometimes it happens in a real world. How about we say happen a story that isn't real and sometimes happens in the fake world. Okay. So we're going to stop sharing for a second. I want to see or hear from you guys if you think this is a good definition that we can use. So I can see I see a thumbs up. I see another thumbs up. All right. So we are going to listen to a story together, and I'm going to take stops throughout the story so we can have a little discussion together like I said, depending on what your students are more comfortable with, they can use the chat box or they can speak aloud. So I'm going to, before I share my screen with you, I am gonna be asking questions throughout the story, and I am going to tell you that something really important as we're listening to is I want you to be listening and thinking about what could happen in this story and what could not happen in this story. And also tying it back to our student created definition. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys again. And I'll show you what we're going to listen to today. So this story is called The Wolves in the Walls, and I got this read aloud from YouTube, but I'm using a website called Safe YouTube because many school districts block their students automatically from viewing YouTube in case there's any inappropriate material. So this story is on something called SafeTube, which removes any of the ads that a student might see or comments, and it just shows them the video in a safe way. So I am gonna start with asking a question for you guys to think about as you are listening. But first, I'm going to show you my chart that we're going to be filling out. So here's our chart that we're going to be using together. It's what could happen in this story and what could not happen in this story. And when I say in this story, I mean in real life. What is possible? The story's fiction, but sometimes in fiction stories, things can happen in real life. So my first question for you guys to make this in an interactive read aloud is I want you to listen to the beginning of this story and think, why do you think Lucy, who is the little girl in the story, why do you think no one believes her about something? She thinks something and her family doesn't believe her. So let's take a listen. And
The Wolves in the Walls.
Can you guys hear it?
Written by Neil Gaiman, illustrated
Awesome.
by Dave McKean. Read aloud by Miss Kelly. Lucy walked around the house. Inside the house, everything was quiet. Her mother was putting homemade jam into pots. Her father was out at his job playing the tuba. Her brother was in the living room playing video games. Lucy heard noises. The noises were coming from inside the walls. They were hustling noises and bustling noises. They were crinkling noises and crackling noises. They were sneaking, creeping, crumpling noises. Lucy knew what kinds of things make noises like that in the walls of big old houses, and she went and told her mother. "There are wolves in the walls," Lucy said to her mother. "I can hear them." "No," said her mother, "there are no wolves in the walls. You must be hearing mice, I suppose." "Wolves," said Lucy. "I'm sure it's not wolves," said her mother, "for you know what they say, if the wolves come out of the walls, then it's all over." "What's all over?" asked Lucy. "It," said her mother. "Everybody knows that." Lucy picked up her pig puppet doll, which...
So we're going to pause right there, and I want you to think about, why do you think that her mother doesn't believe her? And we'll find out later on that other family members don't believe her either. So let's stop our screen sharing, and you can either speak up or you can type into the chat.
Well, her mother might not believe her because typically there aren't wolves in walls. It's more likely a mouse or a rat or something.
Right, I definitely agree. And I see Lexi said wolves are too big to fit in walls. Right, so could this happen in real life? Probably not. And that might be something that we want to put into our chart for what could probably not happen in real life. So as I continue this story, I want you guys to actually think about some things that could happen in real life from this story. So there's obviously going to be things that could not happen, but you'd be surprised to find out there are some things that could happen. So I'm going to share my screen again, and we'll listen to a few more minutes, and then we're going to work on our chart again.
she'd had since she was a little baby. "I don't think it sounds like mice," she said to her pig puppet. In the middle of the night, when everything was still, she heard clawing and gnawing, nibbling and squabbling. She could hear the wolves in the walls, plotting their wolfish plots, hatching their wolfish schemes. In the day, Lucy felt eyes upon her, watching her from the cracks and from the holes in the walls. They peeped through the eyes in paintings. She went to talk to her father. "There are wolves in the walls," she told him. "I don't think there are, Poppet," he told her. "You have an overactive imagination. Perhaps the noises you heard comes from rats. Sometimes you get rats in big old houses like this." "It's wolves," said Lucy. "I can feel them in my tummy. And Pig Puppet thinks it's wolves as well." "Well, you can tell your puppet," began her father, and then he said, "Why am I asking you to tell her anything? She's just a puppet." Lucy patted her pig puppet's head so she wouldn't be offended. "Anyway, you know what they say about wolves," said her father. "If the wolves come out of the walls, it's all over." "Who says that?" asked Lucy. "People, everybody, you know," said her father, and he went back to practicing his tuba. She was drawing a picture when she heard the noises again, a scrambling, rambling, rustling in the walls. "There are wolves in the walls," she told her brother. "Bats," he said. "You think it's bats?" she asked.
So we're going to stop there. So either in the chat box or if you want to come off mute and talk, share some things that could happen in real life that happen in this story. And if you can't think of anything, I can help. She could have a pig puppet, right? Children can have toys that they talk to. That's a good one. There could be rats in the wall. There definitely could be rats in someone's wall. Any other ones? How about could parents not believe a child that they're afraid of something and people don't believe them? Can children be afraid of something most people don't think is real? That's one I thought of. Any other ones? All right, so I am going to share my screen again so we can fill in my chart of things that could happen. So let me share with you guys again. And we will say what could happen in this story. We said there could be rats or other animals in the wall. There could be a child with a toy they talk to. And there can be children who are afraid of something other people don't believe in. So if I was doing this as an actual lesson with real students, I would continue the story and take more breaks as a chance to keep the interactive part of an interactive read aloud. I would give them a chance to talk either aloud or speak into the chat box. We would continue to fill in our chart and talk about the different things that happen in the story that could be real or the things that could not be real. And I will show you the exit ticket I have created for if I was teaching this to a real class. So I'm going to share my screen one more time and show you an idea I have for an exit ticket. So for our exit ticket, we would complete a similar chart that students would pick one of 3 stories I have picked for them. So I would individually pick stories for every single student based on their reading level to make sure it is an independent reading level text for them, but I also want to give them the choice of getting to pick their own story. So out of the 3, they get to pick one, and then they would fill in this chart on their own about what could happen in the story, what could not happen in the story. And then they're going to look back on our classroom created definition of fantasy stories and decide whether or not they believe the story they picked is a fantasy story. And one way I would differentiate among students is that students would either have the chance to leave the Zoom call and complete this independently, or they can stay on the Zoom call with me as sort of an office hours where I would help answer their questions and guide them through working, or they can also work with a pair. So thank you for watching. That is my demo of how you can do an interactive read aloud, and thank you for my friends who participated.